I was the one who cataloged Sister Margaret's final confession, and I'm the one who has to live with what she whispered into that tape recorder before they found her in the chapel. I've worked at St. Jude's Parish in Fairfield, Connecticut, for 11 years now, not as a priest or even a deacon, but as the parish archivist. It's a quiet job. Most people don't even know we have an archive. I spend my days in the basement of the rectory, preserving baptism records from 1953, restoring faded wedding certificates, and digitizing the parish's correspondence with the Vatican. It's the kind of work you could do with your eyes closed, which is exactly why they gave it to me. I'd been a deacon once, a long time ago, before my faith became more of a habit than a certainty. The church, in its infinite mercy, found a place where my doubt couldn't hurt anyone. The confessionals have always been a point of fascination for me. Not the booths themselves, but the tapes. In 1988, the diocese installed a state-of-the-art audio system in the confessionals, supposedly for the hearing impaired, but really it was just a fancy way to record everything. Most priests forgot the tapes were even running. They'd record over the same reel for weeks, recycling the silence and the mundane sins of a Connecticut suburb. Gossip, impatience, the occasional shoplifting at the Stop and Shop on Route 9. Sister Margaret was different. She was an elderly nun, 92 years old, who had served at St. Jude's since the parish was founded. She was a fixture, a tiny, bird-like woman with a permanent tremor in her hands and a voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. She'd been hearing confessions since the Kennedy administration, and she never once used the recording system. She refused, said it was an abomination, said the Lord didn't need a stenographer, so when she died, when they found her in the chapel, kneeling in front of the altar at 3 a.m., her hands frozen in a prayer she never finished, they called me. The police had ruled it a heart attack, but Father Bell was uneasy. He said she'd been acting strange for weeks, muttering in her sleep during evening prayers, refusing to touch the host during communion, and she'd left one thing behind, a cassette tape tucked inside her missal with my name scrawled across the label in her shaky, spidery handwriting. "She wanted you to have this," Father Bell said, handing me the tape in a Ziploc bag. "She said it would explain everything." I took the tape back to the archive, to my desk in the corner with the flickering fluorescent light. The tape was a standard 60-minute cassette, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore. No markings on the shell, just that label, my name. I put it into my old dictaphone player, the one I'd kept from my seminary days, and I pressed play. The first thing I heard was static, long, low, and rumbling like a distant thunderstorm trapped in the magnetic strips. Then a voice, but it was Sister Margaret's. It was a man's voice, deep and wet like gravel being dragged through mud. It spoke in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow I understood it. Not the words, there was no translation, no hidden code. I understood the intent. It was asking a question, a simple question. Over and over again, the same cadence, the same rising pitch at the end, like a child asking why, but with all the warmth of a glacier. The question was, where is the door? I sat there frozen, the dictaphone's tiny speaker crackling in the dead air of the archive. The tape ran for 47 minutes. 47 minutes of that same question, repeated in 1,000 different inflections, some pleading, some threatening, some almost bored. And beneath it, just at the edge of hearing, I could make out another sound, a rhythmic thumping, soft like a heartbeat, or something knocking very politely from the other side of a wall. The tape ended. I rewound it. I played it again. This time I heard something new. Sister Margaret's voice, faint and buried like she was whispering from a great distance. She was saying a name. Over and over beneath the man's voice, she was whispering my name. I called Father Bell. I told him I needed to see the chapel. The chapel was cold, even for a Connecticut autumn. The stained glass windows filtered the weak afternoon sun into pale, watery blues and reds, and the air was thick with the smell of old incense and candle wax. The altar had been stripped bare since Margaret's passing. No cloth, no candlesticks, just the bare marble slab. And beneath it, just visible in the grout between the tiles, was a hairline crack I'd never noticed before. It ran the length of the altar as if the stone itself had been strained. I knelt where Sister Margaret had been found. The tiles were cold through my trousers, and I could feel the faint, familiar ache in my knees that had driven me away from the priesthood. I pressed my ear to the floor. Nothing. Just silence, the same silence that haunts every empty church. But the thing was, silence is never really silent. There's always the hum of the HVAC system, the tick of the thermostat, the distant murmur of traffic from the street. In that chapel under that altar, there was none of that. There was just a void, a pure and absolute absence of sound, like the whole space had been excavated of meaning. And then from somewhere impossibly far away, I heard it. A knocking. Rhythmic, polite, almost human. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, like a question being asked, I thought. Knock, 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 knock. Where is the door? I pulled out my phone and dialed the archivist at the cathedral in Hartford, a friend of mine who owed me a favor. I asked him if there were any records of St. Jude's being built on anything unusual. An old cemetery, a burial ground, a site of a massacre. He laughed and said the parish was built in 1954 on a former dairy farm. Nothing notable. But then he paused. Actually, he said, there was something. In the early 80s, the diocese paid to have the foundation inspected. There was some kind of collapse in the basement, a wall that buckled for no reason. They sealed it off, filled it with concrete. Cost 20 grand, made the local paper. You ever seen the sub-basement? There is no sub-basement, I said. The archive is the basement. Not according to the insurance records, he said. There's a door behind the old boiler. It's on the blueprints. I hung up. I stared at the altar for a long, long time. The crack in the marble had widened, just a fraction, but I could see it. And there was something in the crack, a thread. A single strand of dark brown hair, identical to the ones I'd combed away from my face that morning. I went back down to the archive. The dictaphone was still on the desk, still set to play. The tape had rewound itself, the reels spinning smoothly. I pressed play. The voice was stronger now, clearer, and the knocking was louder. It was no longer coming from the tape. It was coming from the wall, from the old, forgotten door behind the boiler that no one was supposed to know about. I did what any rational person would do. I locked the archive, I left the parish, and I drove home to my apartment in Hartford. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that knocking, polite, patient, asking the same question. Where is the door? Where is the door? Where is the door? By morning, I had a plan. I would go back, wait for the parish to empty, and I would open that door. I would see what Sister Margaret saw. I would find out why she begged me to have the tape. It's the easiest thing in the world to convince yourself you're being brave when you're actually just being curious. St. Jude's was empty by 4 p.m. Father Bell was out at a hospital visit, and the evening cleaning crew didn't come until 6:30. I had the place to myself. I went to the archive, past the rows of baptism records and marriage certificates and the faint, sweet smell of old paper, until I reached the boiler room at the far end. The boiler was ancient, a cast-iron beast that groaned and clicked as it struggled to heat the rectory. Behind it, just as my friend had said, was a door. It was small, only about 4 feet high, made of oak so old it had turned black. There was no handle, no lock, just a keyhole filled with rust and a single word carved into the wood, so faint I had to run my fingers over it to read it. N-O-Q-I-E-T. It wasn't a warning, it was a name, or a place, or just a word that had no meaning anymore, a word that had been worn smooth by years of silence. I knelt down the way I had at the altar and I put my ear to the door. The knocking was loud now. Fast, frantic, like a heartbeat, like a fist on a coffin lid. Sister Margaret, I said, my voice cracking. The knocking stopped. And then from the other side of the door, endless and bottomless and impossibly vast, a voice answered. It was the voice from the tape. The wet, gravelly voice that asked its question over and over. But now it was asking a different question. Who is there? I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was frozen, my ear still pressed to the wood, listening to the sound of something breathing. Not human, not animal, just breath. The breath of a vast and empty place, a place that had been waiting, patient and polite for 11 years, since the parish hired a failed deacon to keep its secrets. I pulled out my phone and searched the carving again. I typed the word into Google. Nothing, no results, as if the word had been scrubbed from the internet, from every encyclopedia, from every language on earth. I sat there in front of that door for 30 minutes. 60. The knocking began again, softer this time, almost gentle. And then I heard my own voice, distorted and slowed down, coming from the other side of the oak. I don't want to forget this, I saw myself say. The words crawled out of the cracks between the boards. I need to see what he sees, I need to tell him. And then the door swung open, not into a sub-basement, not into a concrete chamber. It opened into a vast, dark space lit only by a single candle flame flickering in the distance. And kneeling in front of that candle, her back to me, was Sister Margaret. Her hands were frozen in prayer, just as they'd been when they found her in the chapel. But she wasn't praying, she was holding something. A key, a long brass key glinting in the candlelight. Margaret, I breathed. She turned. I'm writing this from my desk in the archive. The door is open behind me. The knocking has stopped. All is quiet, but I know what I saw. She's not gone. She's waiting for me to join her. She's holding the key to the next door, and she's not alone. There are others behind her in the dark, hundreds of them kneeling in procession, their hands frozen in prayer, their faces turned toward the wall they've been knocking on for centuries. The tape is still playing. I can hear it now from the dictaphone on my desk. It's no longer Sister Margaret's voice. It's the voice of everyone who's ever knelt at that altar, and they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying my name. I've been asked to write one more entry, one last confession, and I will. I'll close this archive, I'll lock the door behind me, and I'll take the key from Sister Margaret's hands. Because the door wasn't the end of the question, it was the beginning, and I'm the one who's knocking now.